And second, that parties allow non-members to stand as their candidates. And in this case, we have Bersatu Sabah concurrently as member of Kerajaan Nasional and also Gabungan Rakyat Sabah. And in the election, you have Bersatu Sabah has 4 MPs elected under GRS, 1 under PN. If we go by the law, then the questions here come back to say if they represent the coalitions in GRS, as long as they with GRS, then they cannot run. They cannot. They cannot leave GRS without facing a by-election, and that's the argument put forward by Bersatu Sabah. Those who quit, and PN challenged the argument, saying that they were members of GRS only through Bersatu. So when they quit Bersatu, they already quit GRS as well. Now the new argument is that they were direct representative of GRS. That would get them out of the hook. But come back to here, what should be done? The law was not drafted with full clarity because we do not even have a definition that one definition for political party and the other one for coalition. So coalitions are treated as just political parties. That's fundamentally where we get into trouble. This has been forewarned, but unfortunately it's there. Now, what about the spirit? What should we really do? It's a tough question. I would want to go a little bit further. The only way to solve party hopping, to deter party hopping, is to build up parties rather than constraining politicians or parliamentarians. If parties are strong in the sense that they develop programmatic differences, so voters want to vote them for who they are, what they represent for, and you won't have defection so often, and certainly not just to change, to get new position in government. So ultimately, it's the whole question here, how do we build, promote healthy and effective inter-party competition?
Can I ask you to elaborate, Chin Hua, what do you mean by build up parties? Because if we want to honor the spirit of the anti-hopping law, prevent future defections, prevent people from jumping, or entire parties from jumping, what do you mean by build up parties, making sure that they have a differentiation?
Right. If we are thinking about the spirit of anti-hopping law now, it is to give party leaders the power. For example, DAP amended his party constitution so much so that if any of their elected representatives and even senators defy the party's order in legislative voting, they would be deemed to have ceased to be members of the party. So basically, your act would disqualify yourself, and therefore you come under this anti-hopping law. But that doesn't actually, that is problematic because ultimately you're taking away the power of MPs to make their decision. And we looked at established democracy with rare examples like New Zealand. Most countries do not have anti-hopping law. Why? Because voters have strong party identification. And when an MP chooses to leave party A to party B, the calculation would then be because my politics have become so different from my party politics, I should move on, and I would get new supporters in exchange of foregoing my party in exchange of new supporters. But not in Malaysia. In Malaysia, because that, first of all, if you are opposition, you get discriminated in allocations. And because our parliament or state assemblies are not really functional, you don't really have real power. Voters vote you in often is to decide which party to form government. And in a case like Sabah, if you can change to another party and you can bring in more development fund back to your constituency. Your voters may not mind. In 2020 Sabah elections, 2/3 of those party hoppers who went back to their constituency to seek re-election succeeded in getting the mandate. Because these are the ones, most of them, who moved to the federal government parties.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that the first test of the anti-hopping law was to do with Sabah politics, which is so fragmented and so complicated, not clear-cut at all. And I think it does reveal a lot about maybe the vagaries of the law itself, but also the nature of Malaysian politics. If I may, Chin Huat, just move on to the conversation of Perikatan Nasional. And I think it's quite interesting because we're seeing, so the issue with Bersatu Sabah might affect Perikatan Nasional, given that we saw last week Sabah Star had also recently quit Perikatan Nasional. Are we thinking about a situation where SAPP might also eventually leave the opposition coalition? And what might happen to Perikatan Nasional then?
Well, I think if we just compare what happened with the exit of Star and Bersatu Sabah from PN, that just immediately after the formations of Anwar Ibrahim government with the support of GIS, right? There's no real difference. What we had is actually the Bersatu and Star, they were part of the PN in the opposition, but then at the same time, they're part of the federal government. So you basically have a split personality in this party. But in terms of balance of power in the parliament, it's actually the same. But what is the message sent to PN? This is like what happened to UMNO, to Barisan Nasional and UMNO after 2018. It's just exactly 12 of December. So actually, today is the 4th anniversary of the UMNO Sabah meltdown. Same people, Hajiji, Mercedes, and others, 4 years ago, they pulled themselves out from UMNO because they later joined Bersatu because they want to be on the federal government side, and now they did the same again. So in that sense, what we need to worry about is this sending a message for PN to react as how UMNO did after losing its East Malaysian partner. At the time, UMNO decided that there's no future for them to pretend to be multi-ethnic, to be centrist. They went all the way to the right, team up with PAS, and attacked PH almost on every policy as selling out Islam and the Malays. And if this is what PN is going to do next, the PH-led coalition government would have big challenges ahead.
Right. And what do you make of the fact that Perikatan Nasional has named the Secretary General Hamzah Zainuddin as the opposition leader, not the party presidents, not the chairman of Perikatan Nasional, but the Sekjen? What do you think?
It's very interesting. Of course, we know that Hamzah Zainuddin is a good operator, and he would provide effective leadership to PN. But it's interesting that why is it that Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin refused to take up that post? Because if you want to be Prime Minister, then you first become Prime Minister in waiting, which is the positions of parliamentary opposition leader. But I think what is more interesting now to us is that where would Hamzah Zainuddin take his coalition to? And interestingly enough, that post remained with Bersatu and not with PAS.
Chin Huat, you've highlighted the Westminster tradition of having the role of His Majesty's loyal opposition. Can I get you to elaborate a little bit about that, why you think this is something that Malaysia should do?
If we look at Westminster Parliament, it consists of the monarch and also the Parliament, the upper and the lower houses. But when we look at the both houses, we would say one side is the government, that's His Majesty government, and the other side is His Majesty loyal opposition. The opposition is not loyal to the government. Instead, it would try to replace the government in next elections, or when the parliament has lost confidence in the government. But what it would do is to do its best in check and balance of the government and preparing itself to take over, but not in any way to sabotage the country. This is what we need. We need a functioning opposition, and people are using the palace to accuse PN of not joining the Grand Coalition, the so-called unity government. I don't think unity government is the right idea. You're going to have a bloated government. It probably would be dysfunctional because the minister won't trust each other. But what we really need now is for PN to appoint its shadow cabinet, one shadow minister for every of the 28 ministerial portfolios, and to get all these shadow ministers to be sworn in the palace to play the role as His Majesty royal opposition, and the minister should be paid. If we look at the Australian example, 1/3 of the minister's salary, they should be given some basic support, policy research, access to government information.
So a shadow cabinet that is sworn in front of His Majesty, given a salary, given access to all government resources. That's what you're proposing. Has this proposal come up before? Clearly, Malaysia has not considered this before or has not thought to implement it before. Do you think it might be possible this time around?
I think so. If PH is far-sighted enough, they should do so. Because the worst situation you could have is to have a nasty opposition out there to distract you from everything of your effort. And there is a temptation for PH to go that way, thinking that by maximizing their incumbent advantages, then they can win. Unfortunately, I've seen this in one of the by-election drama. The main speaker actually asked the voters, do you want to vote for the government or the opposition? Now, if that mentalities work, MCA would have beaten DAP flat down. But that's not the case. We know that the country has changed so much. You cannot defeat your opposition by simply marginalizing them. What you really need to is to get them in healthy and professional competitions, as what we would expect of footballers in the World Cup. we need our politicians to be as professional.
Right,
and
sportsmanship.
Australia and New Zealand do pay their shadow minister. What they do not have is the swearing-in part. I think this is particularly important in Malaysia because if we believe that the monarchy, the palace can play such a stabilizing role, then that role given should be building the expectations on the opposition to function professionally and responsibly.
Chin Huat, thank you so much for speaking with me. Political scientist, Professor Wong Chin Huat there. We're going to take a very quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned.
Telah banyak yang saya lalui. Pasang surut kehidupan membentuk diri saya pada hari ini. Dengan kerja keras, keyakinan dan sokongan padu keluarga, saya mampu sampai ke puncak. Akan tetapi, kepedihan dan kekalahan bukannya halangan. Saya mengatasi setiap halangan dan kembali kuat.
Gardenia Breakthrough, mengatasi setiap halangan.
Abah kamu ada je yang tak kena. Hari tu,
Wish, laju.
Mari. Sebab tu, plan dia sekarang ni paling laju. Ada macam-macam. Hebat, RM10 pun dapat.
Opah tu, opah ni, awak pun nak juga kan?
Nampak gaya dua-dua ni nak DJ Fiber. Adik pun berhajat nak talent family kan?
Ceritanya semua orang nak.
ini pelan yang terbaik untuk sekeluarga.
Adakah bahan dari sumber semula jadi berkesan? Lihatlah hasil pada rambut anda. Dengan kandungan 90% bahan dari sumber semula jadi, Herbal Essences memelihara rambut secara lembut, membaiki dan melembapkan. Cuba rangkaian produk Herbal Essences kami hari ini.
Bakal Dividend KFC membuat serangan. Gol yang sempurna dengan pelbagai rasa. Raikan kegairahan dengan KFC.
Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the political developments that happened over the weekend. Arina Najwa Ahmad Said joins me on the line now. She is a senior analyst at the political risk consultancy Bauer Group Asia. Arina, the lineup of the 27 deputy ministers, they've been revealed. It rounds up this coalition governments now with the 28 ministers in cabinet. So they were sworn in on the weekend, and today was their first day at work for them. What did you think about the lineup, Arina, and the portfolios that were assigned?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I think, firstly, the lineup is definitely similar to what we've seen in the cabinet. I think there's a lot more representation from the Borneo bloc. I think slight improvement from the cabinet. I think we see more women or female representation here as well. However, I think there are some surprises because I think quite a few people are new. Similar, I guess, to the cabinet position. So people are getting to know not only their cabinet ministers, but also their deputy ministers. We see some portfolios having two personalities from different political parties. I think particularly MOF. We saw Ahmad Mazlan and also now Stephen Sim from DAP. Both as Deputy Finance Ministers. So I think that will be also an interesting thing to look at to see the dynamics between three parties, if you're counting the Prime Minister as a representative from PKR as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you pointed that out. Particularly the Finance Ministry is really interesting to look at. A lot of people have raised concern over the return of Ahmad Mazlan as Deputy Finance Minister. Yeah. He served the same portfolio under Najib Razak. Are there concerns that he was not the right person for this job, given the issues that we've seen under the previous administration?
Yeah, I think first we also look at the composition. I think what Prime Minister Anwar did this time was to kind of divvy up the minister roles to also leaders within the respective parties. I think this is also a sort of tactical move on his part to ensure that his runway towards the vote of confidence is quite comfortable, also making it more difficult for cabinet to be reshuffled. So I think, one, there might be that kind of logic with regards to Ahmad Mazlan being put in as a deputy minister. With regards to whether or not we will have a repeat of what 1MDB. Well, Anwar Ibrahim, number one, already said that, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. So I think that's one part, that he's already made very clear, especially since the appointment of Deputy Prime Minister Zahid Hamidi. So the second part is also he's made a very strong stance. I think if, you notice his initial statements, number one, pointing out that the civil service is the backbone of the government, and then he also will ensure that the cabinet ministers do not interfere too much into their work. I think that's a sign. He also pointed out, there should be more transparency with regards to procurement of, government process, the tendering processes, and also the procurement process. I think there is that strong stance to go and push for reform and push for that anti-corruption stance. So hopefully that's enough of a deterrent to ensure that nothing like 1MDB happens again.
Well, there were also 5 deputy ministers who come from prominent political dynasties. Do these 5 raise any flags for you, Arina?
Well, I think the ones that I would think of is number 1, I think Datuk Hanifah Hajar Taib, so Taib Mahmud's daughter. So I think there's some questions with regards to her family's background and influencing or colouring her performance. So I think that's one thing that people are on the lookout for, and especially when she's looking at the Ministry of Economy. So there could be some question with regards to what kind of investments could she be looking at. It could also be because that family is very well connected. That could also be and she's also from the Borneo region, so that could also be a reason as to why she was placed there. I think another one that people might be questioning as well is Lim Guan Eng's sister, Lim Hui Ying, who's also the Deputy Minister of Education. However, I think that's less of a red flag. I think this is her first foray into as a Deputy Minister within Malaysia's cabinet. I think this is one of the things that people have pointed out is for such a heavy portfolio, you have 2 new people holding that portfolio. So I think there's a lot of question to whether or not these 2 individuals can handle that portfolio, especially with not a lot of background when it comes to holding deputy minister position or minister position. So I think that's a bigger concern with regards to that.
And we have seen the public quite impatient for the minister to get going. We're hearing quite a number of, comments being made directed particularly to her. Can I ask you a little bit about the opposition? So when I spoke to Wong Chin Huat a little bit earlier, he pointed out that it is quite interesting that
to become the leader of the opposition, him as chairperson of Perikatan Nasional, instead the Secretary General became the leader of the opposition. What do you make of that? Do you find this a particularly interesting development to watch?
Yes, I definitely do. I think in addition, Prof. Chin Huat pointed out rightly, usually the leader of opposition is the Prime Minister in waiting, so that's a really big role. So could that also send a signal towards the kind of support that he has within Perikatan Nasional? And I think that's the biggest signal for me when he was appointed as leader of opposition. That does mean that he has the confidence of people within Perikatan Nasional, and even actually more than Tan Sri Muhyiddin. Because you also have to remember that the leader of opposition has a lot of leverage. This is the person that's going to go and meet and go on the other side to go and negotiate. So there's a lot of trust that's being put in the leader of opposition, and there's a lot of also influence that he has within his coalition. So I think that's an interesting shift, that it's no longer, maybe it's an acknowledgement for Tan Sri Muhyiddin's leadership or, Hadi Awang's leadership, that they could not be as strong as Hamza, and he could actually stand a better chance, in leading the opposition coalition, to a better, future, hopefully, for them later on. So that's definitely something to look out for. Prof. Chin Huat pointed out rightly as well, he is a good operator. I think we saw that during the Sheraton move as well, where he managed to, bring himself into the limelight, and he always is not as prolific or not as, public in comparison to the other ministers. However, he always manages to get things done. So maybe that could be the priority or the criteria when you're looking at, selecting a leader of opposition.
I'm curious to know, because it feels like the pieces are kind of falling into place for Perikatan Nasional. We're getting more clarity as to how this coalition is going to operate going forward. My question would be, if we're seeing STAR quitting Perikatan Nasional, if Bersatu Sabah might also be, in jeopardy of collapse, where does that leave Perikatan Nasional without, its non-Malay Muslim parties to help center it is this going to be a coalition that will become even more racially and religiously homogenous, and how might that impact its role as opposition in Dewan Rakyat?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to this as well. We're not just looking at Perikatan Nasional as a coalition. I mean, of course, now with all of these more different non-Malay parties pulling out, they will definitely be a lot more homogenous. And if they do intend on, wanting to become that, have that multiracial banner on them, then they would have to put in a lot more effort. But as of now, I'm not sure what's their stance on that. I mean, they do say that they are multiracial. They're not just looking at Malay rights. They're looking at Malaysia as a whole, but that still is not being highlighted right now. So I think that's one part. Like, what actually is that identity of Perikatan Nasional now moving forward? The other part to me also, what stands out is the consolidation of the strength or growing strength of Borneo Bloc. I think you see now there's a lot more, sort of brave, a lot more brave. They're a lot more brave in forming their own identity. I think there's a lot more. They believe now that this is also the right time for themselves to kind of forge that relationship and say that we are a Borneo Bloc, because they know right now, especially in the situation moving forward, where there's no dominant party anymore, this is the time for them to go and, strengthen and consolidate their interests, because they know now they have a strong bloc to negotiate with whoever, is going to be in power. Because if in the future we may still have a hung parliament anymore. So it's two parts. So one could be that Perikatan Nasional needs to rethink their identity. What is their identity? Right. Is it still going to be that Malay banner that they're going to fight for, or they try to be multiracial? But the other part also is the strengthening of, Borneo Bloc as well. Yeah.
Wonderful. Arina, thank you so much.
Arina, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you.
I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.